This is Hatchet, Chapter 7, read by me, Mr. O'Leary. So this chapter will be again read in two parts. I will read from page 67 to page 72. So if you're following along in the book, it'll be 67 to 72. If you're following along in that document I posted with the whole book highlighted, or with the whole book in Chapter 7 highlighted, then you'll just have to find the stopping point there. So, Chapter 7. Brian is really starting to learn how to survive in the wilderness. He found food and built a shelter. Of course, he will have to find more food than just berries, but that is a good start. Brian will eat the berries for now, but when he searches for berries today, he gets quite a scare. Read on, and you'll see why. So, Chapter 7. There's a picture of kid that's supposed to look like Brian. You can see he's got quite the stomach ache, and it says there, Brian awakes with intense stomach pain. He throws up and has diarrhea. So chapter 7, page 67. Mother! He screamed it, and he could not be sure if the scream awakened him or the pain in his stomach. His whole abdomen was torn with great rolling jolts of pain that doubled him in the darkness of the little shelter, put him over and face down in the sand to moan again and again, Mother, mother, mother! Never anything like this. Never. It was as if all the berries, all the pits had exploded in the center of him, ripped and tore at him. He crawled out the doorway and was sick in the sand, then crawled still farther and was sick again, vomiting and with terrible diarrhea for over an hour. For over a year he, top of page 68, thought, until he was at last empty and drained of all strength. Then he crawled back into the shelter and fell again to the sand, but could not sleep at first, could do nothing except lie there, and his mind decided then to bring the memory up again. In the mall, every detail. His mother sitting in the station wagon with the man, and she had leaned across and kissed the man with the short blonde hair, and it was not a friendly peck, but a kiss where she turned her head over at an angle and put her mouth against the mouth of the blonde man who was not his father and kissed, mouth to mouth, and then brought her hand up to touch his cheek, his forehead, while they were kissing, and Brian saw it. Saw this that his mother did with the blonde man, saw the kiss that became the secret that his father still did not know all about. The memory was so real that he could feel the heat in the mall that day, could remember the worry that Terry would turn and see his mother, could remember the worry of the shame of it, and then the memory faded, and he slept again. Awake. For a second, perhaps two. He did not know, top of page 69. Did not know where he was still in his sleep somewhere. Then he saw the sun streaming in the open doorway of the shelter and heard the close, vicious whine of the mosquitoes and knew. He brushed his face, completely welted now with 2 days of bites, completely covered with lumps and bites, and was surprised to find the swelling on his forehead had gone down a great deal, was almost gone. The smell was awful, and he couldn't place it. Then he saw the pile of berries at the back of the shelter and remembered the night and being sick. Too many of them, he said aloud. Too many gut cherries. He crawled out of the shelter and found where he'd messed the sand. He used sticks and cleaned it as best he could, covered it with clean sand, and went down to the lake to wash his hands and get a drink. It was still very early, only just past true dawn, and the water was so calm he could see his reflection. It frightened him. The face was cut and bleeding, swollen and lumpy. The hair was all matted, and on his forehead a cut had healed, but left the hair stuck with blood and scab. His eyes were slits in the bites, and he was, somehow, covered with dirt. He slapped the water with his hand to destroy the mirror. Page 70. Ugly, he thought, very, very ugly. And he was, at that moment, almost overcome with self-pity. He was dirty and starving and bitten and hurt and lonely and ugly and afraid and so completely miserable that it was like being in a pit, a dark, deep pit with no way out. He sat back on the bank and fought crying, then let it come and cried for perhaps 3-4 minutes, long tears, self-pity tears, wasted tears. He stood, went back to the water, and took a small drink. As soon as the cold water hit his stomach, he felt the hunger sharpen as it had before, and he stood and held his abdomen until the hunger cramps receded. He had to eat. He was weak with it again, down with the hunger, and he had to eat. Back at the shelter, the berries lay in a pile where he had dumped them when he grabbed his windbreaker. Gut cherries, he called them in his mind now, and he thought of eating some of them, not such a crazy amount as he had, which he felt brought on the sickness in the night, but just enough to stave off the hunger a bit. He crawled into the shelter. Some flies were on the berries, and he brushed them off. He selected only the berries that were solidly ripe, not the light red ones, but the berries that were dark, maroon, top of page 71, red to black, and swollen in ripeness. When he had a small handful of them, he went back to the lake and washed them in the water. Small fish scattered away when he splashed the water up, and he wished he had a fishing line and hooks. Then he ate them carefully, spitting out the pits. They were still tart, but had a sweetness to them, although they seemed to make his lips a bit numb. When he finished, he was still hungry, but the edge was gone, and his legs didn't feel as weak as they had. He went back to the shelter. It took him half an hour to go through the rest of the berries and sort them, putting all the fully ripe ones in a pile on some leaves, the rest in another pile. When he was done, he covered the two piles with grass. He tore from the lake's shore to keep the flies off and went back outside. They were awful berries, those gut cherries, he thought, but there was food there, food of some kind, and he could eat a bit more later tonight if he had to. For now he had a full day ahead of him. He looked at the sky through the trees and saw that while there were clouds, they were scattered and did not seem to hold rain. There was a light breeze that seemed to keep the mosquitoes down, and he thought, looking, top of page 72, up along the lake shore. If there was one kind of berry, there should be other kinds, sweeter kinds. If he kept the lake in sight as he had done yesterday, he should be all right, should be able to find home again. And it stopped him. He had actually thought at that time, home, 3 days, no, 2, or was it 3? Yes, this was the 3rd day, and he had thought of the shelter as home. He turned and looked at it, studied the crude work. The brush made a fair wall, not weather-tight, but it cut most of the wind off. He hadn't done so badly at all. Maybe it wasn't much, but also maybe it was all he had for a home. All right, he thought, so I'll call it home. He turned back and set off up the side of the lake, heading for the gut cherry bushes, his windbreaker bag in his hand. Things were bad, he thought, but maybe not that bad. Maybe he could find some better berries. When he came to the gut cherry bushes, he paused. The branches were empty of birds, but still had many berries, and some of those that had been merely red yesterday were now a dark maroon to black, much riper. Maybe he should stay and pick them to save them. But the explosion in the night was still much in his memory, and he decided to go on. Okay, that's where I'll pause. So now we know that Brian has eaten the gut cherries again, and he's taken them down and washed them at the lake. And he's seen some little fish in the lake, so maybe that'll give him an idea for food upcoming in upcoming chapters. But he's also going to be looking for other food as we continue on with the chapter. So I'm going to pause our reading here for now, and then I'm going to begin in just a moment.